The 2022 bowl season is just about wrapped up, and the national championship is all that remains in the 2022 college football season. And I got to thinking, what if every team got to bowl season, not just the 6+ win teams? And obviously, the games would not be that good. That's a simple answer, that's for sure. It's kind of a wild thought, but this is what I think would happen if every team made it to bowl season, not just the 6+ win team. So I made some matchups, and here they are. Let's get started with your higher end Power 5 games, and it includes a whole bunch of 5 and 7 teams. But I do think if we did have these matchups, now the lower end bowl games would just be horrendous. I mean, that's pretty simple to say when you got 11 lost teams going head to head against each other. But I feel like these matchups actually would have some interest in them. Now, Auburn and Michigan State, two teams that definitely disappointed this season. Well, I mean, Auburn, we kind of knew that this was going to be a down season for them, and since they fired Brian Harsin, I mean, it's just been a rough go at it the past couple of years for Auburn. But they got Hugh Freeze coming in to coach this team, and I think the future does have some optimism for Auburn. And Michigan State on the other side, this team was just a straight-up disappointment this season. I mean, Michigan State, they made it to New Year's Six bowl game in 2021. So yeah, it was a tough season for Michigan State, but I do think there's some intrigue in that matchup if it were to happen between Auburn and Michigan State. Nebraska, Texas A&M is the next one. Now, both these teams used to be in the Big 12. That's why I think this one could be an interesting matchup. You also could have Nebraska against Auburn or Nebraska against Miami. That would also be an interesting one. Nebraska and Miami, both with excellent pass, and obviously they had a rivalry back a couple decades ago. But I do think Nebraska, Texas A&M could be an interesting one. The Aggies, Texas A&M, what a rough season for them. I mean, the top recruiting class heading into this season, and they finish out 5 and 7. Really, you start to question the coaching situation and Jimbo Fisher with Texas A&M there. But Aggies, I do think the future is bright, but 2022 was a massive disappointment. They were probably the biggest disappointment in the country this year. Nebraska was a disappointment too. I mean, the Huskers they haven't been good in a while. I mean, they haven't made it to a bowl game since 2016, but there was some optimism for this team heading into 2022, but just didn't happen. Scott Frost fired, Matt Rule's in, and I think the future is bright for Nebraska as well. Vanderbilt and Arizona is the next one. Now, Vanderbilt finished out the season pretty strong. They got up to 5 wins, knocking on the door of bowl season. And I think this could be an interesting matchup. Two teams that have been pretty bad in the past. Vanderbilt and Arizona in recent history, both teams have been terrible. Both teams had somewhat good seasons. I mean, considering where both teams have been, I'd say getting up to 5 wins for both teams was definitely a step in the right direction. You got West Virginia and Miami, the next one. Miami, both teams are 5 and 7, or were 5 and 7 this season. The Hurricanes definitely were disappointed as well. So I mean, there's a common theme here. Most of these teams in this first slate have been disappointments this season. I mean, if you look at Michigan State, Texas A&M, Miami especially, those three were your biggest disappointments this year. And so the Hurricanes against West Virginia could be a decent matchup. I'd probably take Miami to win that one. If you're asking who I think would win these matchups, I'd probably take Michigan State. I'd probably take Texas A&M. Although Nebraska would put up a good fight, they'd probably lose in a 1-score game because that's exactly what they know how to do. I'd probably take Arizona against Vanderbilt. Honestly, that one's a toss-up for sure. Vanderbilt played really well down the stretch, for their standards at least. I'd take Vanderbilt in a close one, and I'd probably take Miami against West Virginia. Moving on, we got Georgia Tech and Indiana. Georgia Tech got up to 5 wins, which is improvement off of recent years. I mean, it's kind of funny because most of these teams, it's been improvement this year because most years they've just been terrible, especially in recent history. Indiana, once again, had a bad year, got up to 4 wins. I do think Indiana, they'd probably beat Georgia Tech, although that would be a rough one there, I think. Rutgers and Cal, both teams 4-8 this season. Yeah, Rutgers, I mean, there was some promise at points this season for the Scarlet Knights, but still finished out the season 4-8. Cal was just not a good team this year. I'd take Rutgers against Cal if that game were to happen. Iowa State, Virginia Tech 3-8. Obviously, they didn't have their 12th game. That Virginia game was canceled due to the unfortunate situation with Virginia. But Virginia Tech, Iowa State, I'd probably take the Cyclones here. Virginia Tech just has had a rough year. It's been the worst year we've seen in a while for Virginia Tech, and so they're definitely in a rebuild phase right now. Iowa State on the other side, we knew it was going to be maybe a bit of a rebuild season for the Cyclones, considering obviously Brock Purdy and everyone leaving that team after 2021. But I would take Iowa State against Virginia Tech. Virginia, Arizona State, this one, I consider just leaving Virginia out of this, but I figured might as well put them in one. And I put the Cavaliers against Arizona State. This one, I mean, I feel like Virginia is a team that really had talent this year. I mean, I actually had pretty high expectations for the Cavs this season. I thought they'd be a favorite to win their division just because Brennan Armstrong coming back, but he disappointed a bit. I mean, Virginia is the more talented team. I'd probably take them against Arizona State. Sun Devils were just a bad team this season. But moving on now to some of your lower end Power 5 games. Both of these games, Stanford, Boston College, Colorado Northwestern, would honestly be so bad that they would almost be entertaining games just because of how terrible they are. I mean, Stanford, Boston College, two just horrible teams this season. I'd probably take Boston College there. Now, Colorado Northwestern, I mean, Northwestern, I will say this about the Wildcats, they did have several close games this season. Colorado just got blown out in every single game this year. I mean, it was a rough go at it for the Buffaloes, that's for sure. But I will say, I mean, Deion Sanders going into Colorado, maybe in a couple of years, the Buffaloes could be at least somewhat of a contender in the Pac-12. But Northwestern, I'd definitely take Northwestern in that game just because they have played competitively in some of their games this season despite only having one win. And I decided to create bowl games for the Group of 5 as well. Tulsa, UNLV, Kent State, Florida Atlantic would be two of your higher end Group of 5 bowl games. I'd probably take UNLV. I think they're a decent team, and I'd probably take Florida Atlantic as well. And then moving on to some of your other Group of 5 games, Western Michigan, Georgia State could be one. I don't know these teams well enough to give a good prediction on any of these, but I do think these would be intriguing matchups at least. UTEP Ball State's another one. Navy, Louisiana Monroe, Florida International, Texas State. You got Colorado State, Central Michigan, Temple, and Hawaii. Temple and Hawaii actually could be an interesting one. Temple 3-9, horrible season. Hawaii more of the same, but you got two very different teams there. Temple from the East Coast, Hawaii from the Mountain West. That could be an interesting one there. And then to some of your lower end Group of 5 games, Arkansas State, Louisiana Tech. We got Old Dominion, Charlotte, Northern Illinois, and Nevada. New Mexico and South Florida was probably the battle of the two worst Group of 5 teams. I mean, Akron's pretty terrible they're so bad to the point I just put them against UMass. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting concept, kind of a wild concept, and it's kind of a random video as well. But I figured it'd be interesting just to see where the lower end, the teams that didn't get up to 6 wins, some potential matchups. And as I mentioned before, I mean, some of those higher end Power 5 games where you got like, yeah, Nebraska, Texas A&M, or even Auburn and Michigan State, those actually I think would be interesting matchups. Even Vanderbilt and Arizona, those could be interesting ones. But once you get past, 4 to 5 win teams, the games would just be horrible. And I think we'd realize real quick why bowl games aren't meant for teams under 6 wins. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Kind of a random video, but I figured it'd be interesting. And yeah, that said, stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.